Good morning, Clearbranch kids, and Happy New Year. A lot of times when we think about a new year, we think about a fresh start. We think about resetting and really doing things well. And that makes this the perfect time for this month's theme. This month, we're going to be learning all about responsibility. Now, that's an awfully big word, but it just means that we can be trusted with what is expected of us. So let's get started. Now, today's lesson is going to come from Matthew, the first book in the New Testament. And where we pick up, Jesus is around 30 years old, and he's involved in his ministry fully at this point, traveling around and teaching and healing everywhere he goes. And everywhere Jesus went, crowds would gather. All different kinds of people would come to see Jesus. Some just because they wanted to hear what he had to say. They'd heard about this man who claimed to be the Son of God, and they wanted to hear him. Others came because they knew that Jesus was healing people, and they hoped that they themselves would be healed. Other people came, like the religious leaders, because they didn't like Jesus. They didn't trust him. They didn't believe that he was who he said he was, that he was truly the Son of God. And they were hoping that if they came around and they asked the right questions, that they might be able to trick Jesus into saying something that would get him in trouble. In this story, on that day was like that. Jesus had come to Jerusalem for the Passover feast, and as he was teaching from the crowd, a man who was a Pharisee and was a law scholar thought he had the perfect question to trick Jesus up. And so he asked Jesus, "Teacher, what is the most important law or commandment?" Now, this law scholar knew that if Jesus answered this question with just one law or commandment, that he would have to be saying that others were not important. And that would either get him in enough trouble that they could potentially arrest him, or it would anger enough people that maybe they could just chase him off. But this leader was wrong, because Jesus had the right answer, and he shared it with them then. What he told them was that the greatest commandment was to love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind. And then second to that was to love others as you love yourself. See, what Jesus was telling them is that if you do those two things, if you do everything in your life, loving God first and foremost with everything in your being, and if you then spent the rest of your time trying to love others, you wouldn't break any of these other laws or commandments, because if you were doing these things, you would automatically be following other rules. Now, Jesus wasn't trying to be tricky. He was just trying to show people that what it means to live as a child of God and as a Christian was not about checking off a bunch of rules or commandments on a list, but instead living in the way that God asks us to live, putting God first and then others. And see, guys, that is our greatest responsibility, and also today's bottom line, to love God and to love others.